Welcome to SIMcast, a podcast brought to you by the Society for Imaging Informatics and Medicine.
Greetings, SIMcast listeners. Today, we have another installment in the hackathon-themed episodes for you, where we catch up with a team from Cleveland Clinic that won the 2022 SIIM Hackathon First Place Award. On this episode, we have Catherine DeCoste, who is a software developer for the Cleveland Clinic Imaging Informatics, Data Science, and Software Development team. Kathy has a Bachelor of Science in Computer Systems from the Wright Institute of Technology in Columbus, Ohio. She has over 30 years experience, almost 9 at the Cleveland Clinic, and 6 of those with the Imaging Institute. She has worked on a variety of projects, but many are data-centric, regarding imaging information for research and informational purposes. Mike Ciancibello is a data scientist for the Cleveland Clinic Imaging Informatics, Data Science, and Software Development team. He's got over 9 years of experience and has worked on a variety of projects focused on business intelligence solutions, software development, data analysis in the medical imaging informatics domain. Last but not least, we have Lindsay Marrero, who is a software development again at the Clinic Informatics, Data Science, and Software Development team. She has 12 years experience working with medical imaging data, and she is excited to see where diverse data sets can take healthcare in the near future. We hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed taping it. Thank you. Well, Team Cleveland Clinic, thank you for being here with us today. Why don't we start this episode by getting a brief description of what the hackathon experience is like for anybody who's not familiar with that event. Maybe Lindsay, we could start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having us. It's a pleasure being a part of the hackathon experience, and then also being a part of this SIMcast is an honor. So thank you for having us. So I would say the hackathon experience overall, if you're familiar with any other kind of hackathon, it's not like that. It's not all about pizza and Mountain Dew and staying up for 3 days straight and, not getting any sleep and that sort of thing. It's more about collaborating and having fun and learning something new that you normally wouldn't have the time to dedicate to learning during your normal work hours. At least that's what it's like for us. I know every time we go into a hackathon, I think this is our, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I think it's our 8th year, or was our 8th year this past year. Every time we go into a hackathon, we try to pick up a new technology that we've, been curious about in the past and just haven't had the opportunity to learn it.
You're able to collaborate with other people on other teams, and you can even be a code hero to help others out that are new to the process. And it's more of a education / having fun and learning new technologies.
Sure. And I'll just add, it's a really great way to learn some of the healthcare APIs that are available. So the, SIIM provides FHIR APIs, DICOM Web APIs, and in 2022, they had a blockchain server running at the Ethereum. So that was really helpful for us to just sort of jump in and experiment with all the different APIs. And at the same time, take a technology that maybe we wouldn't have the opportunity to learn or to implement in our, day-to-day jobs. The hackathon's a perfect time to sort of experiment with, healthcare and non-healthcare APIs and just, tinker with new technology.
That's great. A lot of people have just amazing experiences with the hackathon. I always enjoy seeing what people come up with for the different solutions to the various problems out there. Clearly, you guys have been doing this more than once. Can you describe your history with the prior hackathons? How many have you been with? Like, what projects have you done in the past? Mike, why don't we start with you?
So as a team, we have participated in 8 hackathons. So our first one was in 2015. And we've come a long way since then. So, we started out learning the basics, the APIs, learning how to implement, a FHIR API call or a DICOM web call. And through the years, we were able to, sort of try different things that, we may or may not have had a chance to do, in our day-to-day routines. So one year we created a Alexa skill for, I'm going to start over there. So one year we created a Alexa skill called Dr. Dave. And essentially this was a radiology assistant where essentially we would query FHIR and DICOM Web to get information about a patient, and it's all done through an Alexa-enabled device. So we were able to learn, both the Alexa SDK as well as how to integrate that into the clinical APIs. We've also experimented with a nurse on call app, so integrating FHIR with Android APIs. And this year we experimented with blockchain. So, how to incorporate blockchain with FHIR and DICOM Web, and how to store information on an Ethereum server.
I'll just add, we did a couple other cool things with de-identification and DICOM. A DICOM recipe builder, that was really interesting and fun. We're kind of doing that at work anyways. And so we built on that for the hackathon. We did a YOLO and a ChecksNet to process images and find, like, AI kind of finding the issues, finding certain abnormalities in a radiology image.
I'll just add to the answer to that question as well. And kind of looping back to the Dr. Dave project, I agree with Mike that was probably one of my favorite projects to work on for the hackathon. And I'll just mention that it was also like the worst demo. Nothing worked. We didn't account for having very bad Wi-Fi in the conference room where we were demoing. So it just goes to show that, it's not all about having, a working demo and things being all polished up and, having a working prototype and all that. Sometimes it's just presenting an idea, and that's just as well. It doesn't have to be all shiny and spinny and everything. So
That's great. You all mentioned some hints as to what your project was about. I think we heard some terms like Ethereum and maybe we heard blockchain, but before we get into the actual details, can you tell us what the problem was that you decided to solve? And was that your first thought, your first choice? What were you thinking in that initial planning phase?
In our initial planning, we wanted to use the blockchain technology. We like to try new technologies at this hackathon to learn. And we chose the blockchain, and then we floated the idea out to the hackathon community on what kind of problems can we solve with this. We're technical, we're not all clinical, so we would love to hear real world problems. And, some people came up with the vaccine verification, doctor credentials, or validating de-identified research data. And we did parse it down to do a proof of concept just to be able to retrieve patient information and then place their problem list on the blockchain so that we could work with it that way and in smaller chunks, because trying to put a huge image out there, case one, would be difficult. We found very difficult. So it was very interesting to learn it and then find real world problems to solve.
Absolutely. Lizzie, what do you think?
Yeah, I would just say to add to that, our ultimate problem that we wanted to solve was to kind of track changes in the patient or with patient data as they were moving through different healthcare systems. So we all know that patients have many different choices on where to go for their needs. So, we wanted to see, okay, well, if we saw this patient on January 1st and they come back 2 years later, maybe they've had appointments and different changes to their problem list specifically is what we were demoing, is changes to their problem list. We want to make sure that, when they come back to us, that we have the most current information. So that's the specific problem that we tried to solve with this.
We were also interested in trying to see, you hear a lot about, with blockchain, you think cryptocurrency, NFTs, but you might not think about, healthcare or medical imaging. So like Lindsay and Kathy described, we were really trying to see, what is really possible for us to achieve using blockchain in these other domains like healthcare and medical imaging. And, really that's was sort of our main goal and our main, task for this hackathon.
So it sounds like you found blockchain and you kind of decided to find a problem that fit the bill. That being said, you've decided to basically being able to transport and verify medical records across healthcare institutions. Was that a problem you were aware of and just didn't occur to you that maybe blockchain is a solution, or just it came to you from somewhere else? Maybe we start with you, Mike.
So we knew that we wanted to, experiment with blockchain and learn more about it. So, thanks to the hackathon community, we were presented with lots of different ideas and use cases for blockchain. And I think, we really, decided we wanted to focus on blockchain. And then we chose, one of the problems that we thought would be most beneficial or most close to like a real world problem to solve. So, it was a great way to, sort of experiment with blockchain. But then we had a host of use cases that we could attempt to implement or build a prototype.
Okay, so real quick, I'm going to pause right there and ask a really basic question. So excuse the nature of this, but what is blockchain? I think for those of us who may not know much, or we've heard of blockchain, through the media, through the news, what is blockchain?
I'm glad you asked that question because we weren't sure what blockchain really was when we started this project. So, we kind of had to start from square one and, figure out what it was and then, figure out what we can do with it, right? So blockchain essentially is a globally shared, decentralized transactional database. Its main purpose is to synchronize state and history of transactions, kind of like a ledger. So, going back to our problem, you have a patient that goes from point A to point B to point C to point D. Ideally, we would have a transaction or multiple transactions for every time that they move or go to a different healthcare system. And I mean, like the pro that everybody goes to blockchain for cryptocurrency or NFTs or anything like that is that it does prevent fraud. So one change in a historical block would invalidate the entire chain. So, if there was any kind of tampering with that block, it would completely invalidate it. And then, we know that something's wrong, basically. Does that kind of help answer the question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So I've got a bit of a follow-up question on that. I get the idea of the ledger and, we're trying to prevent fraud and keep patients as unique identifiers. But right now with demographics, without having a more national patient index, I know Mohanad and Jason are like, yeah, we've got a provincial index. You guys in the States are so behind the times. Like I can see him just like loving us squirming over here. But a lot of times like patients will come in and they might be like, oh, I'm Jen Smith. And at another hospital, I'm Jennifer Smith. So now you've got two different, right? So you can maintain the fidelity if the patient maintains the same nomenclature at the multiple institutions, but then what happens if you merge institutions or like without knowing those things, or they start changing that, you know what I mean? Like, how do you deal with that in the blockchain itself?
I believe we were going to use the smart contract to be patient specific, to keep that patient's information together over the blockchain for all the historical blocks.
Another possible solution that we came across was giving the patients, the rights and access to their data. So if there are third-party, so for example, in cryptocurrency, you have third-party wallets or services that give the user the power and control over their data. We could attempt to do something similar for patients and medical data, where they could essentially import their data into a different healthcare institution. But I think as we worked, with blockchain and our hackathon project, we quickly realized that that is a real world problem that we need to address. And there may not be, one correct answer. It may be, a multi-part solution.
So, Mike, is what you're talking about kind of the smart contract that Kathy's talking about, or is that something a little different?
I think it would follow along the same lines. I think we would want to create some sort of, standardized, blockchain or smart contract so that, patient data could be easily imported or exported into various healthcare institutions so that you could really, easily take your data and have control over your data regardless of where you receive healthcare.
What kind of buy-in would you need from institutions to adopt this practice? Or is this something that would be patient-driven, a very patient-centric, power to the patients, control over your imaging initiative, where institutions have no option but to adapt to the new paradigm, to this new technology?
I know we struggled with either way, having the patients own it. And then, if you want that patient's information shared globally, every hospital or service, a medical provider would have to buy into the patient owning it and then signing an agreement to allow you to access their data. We also went where we had a third party holding the keys that you'd have to sign, agreement. And when we looked at this, there's all kinds of legalities there. And that's where it went over our heads as developers. We have to check with legal to see, what exactly can we do with this? Can a hospital require you to sign over access to your blockchain data?
I feel like we're dancing around what your project did. So maybe we should ask the question. Maybe Lindsay, you can give us maybe a top-down explanation of how Blimey, I think is what you called your project, works.
So with Blimey, we really just wanted to prove that this was possible, right? So it really was a prototype in which we had a web form set up and you could input a patient ID. And once you hit validate, a validate button, we would do a FHIR API call to get the patient information, but then we would also send an Ethereum call to get the account ID, all of the other patient information, and all of the block information that comes with it. So in addition to that, we would get a transaction count, and that transaction count was really key to determine, has this patient had other activity outside of what we are already aware of.
So just before Kathy and Mike weigh in, I actually want to clarify. So it sounds, when you're saying that you're retrieving information from FHIR, this is basically the equivalent of bringing up the patient in the EMR. But in this case, you're bringing the patient information from essentially two EMR resources. One is the local one, and one is essentially the Ethereum blockchain one in the cloud. So you're basically federating EMRs. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep. Spot on.
And to do that, that's why we had a smart contract for the patient definitions and methods. So it would keep that linked, like each health provider would have that patient's information that they have on their side, but also contain how to find it in the Ethernet, in a blockchain. Using
so that smart contract is essentially explaining to somebody who's looking for that information how you go about finding it and how you go about validating it.
Yes, it would hold the key to go get your blockchain information for that patient. And within their health system, they would have to store an agreement and patient information that would be shared to get that. Some type of ID that you would share to retrieve it.
And like Lindsay and Kathy mentioned, we use smart contracts to store patient problem list data and other medical data on the blockchain. But sort of as a next step, we were really interested in, well, what can we store in terms of medical images or, DICOM data? And that was something that we didn't get a chance to implement or prototype during the hackathon, but it's something that we're really interested in pursuing and learning more about. And we were able to sort of, pitch this idea at a Shark Tank, which was super exciting.
So, like you said, it's proof of concept that you guys can do this stuff and use the blockchain. But one, I do want to hear about the Shark Tank experience. But before we get to that, what were you guys thinking as specific applications for Bleemy. Like I could definitely see this helping with patients at different sites. Like for example, I had one patient once that swore up and down that they had embolization coils in their liver, but we couldn't find anything in any of the EMR reports or anything from the outside hospital. And I told my tech, go to the billing data, follow the money. And sure enough, we were able to find, the charges that yes, this patient does have embolization coils. And of course, that means we're not going to put them in the magnet, yada, yada, yada. So like there's a patient safety aspect to it and lots of things like that. So what, where do you guys see this, other than, federating data and things like that, what other applications do you see this kind of potential with Bleemy?
The one thing we looked at was if you go to a different site, you're in a remote site that you don't normally go to and you have an injury, and instead of them having to take too many imagings of a patient, there may be an existing one to verify what something looked like beforehand than after this incident you occurred in a remote site. And we thought instead of, they don't have access, most remote sites don't have access to your prior images. And this is going, if you're able to store successfully your imaging on the blockchain and retrieve it. You could see the prior image of, say, like their liver, and now the new one from an accident, and see if there really is damage. That was one nice clinical aspect of it.
Yeah, I think another, use case that seemed to come up a lot was, ensuring historical records or transactional data is accurate, right? So in the one use case for vaccine verification, you would get an initial vaccine dose, and then maybe in 3 or 6 months, you would get a follow-up dose. And using blockchain technology, you would be able to track that information over time, regardless of, the institution. And you could go back and you could verify, the block and the ledger to, ensure and guarantee, yes, that information is accurate and it was recorded. So, there's the decentralized aspect of that, but then there's also the transactional and verification aspects, which blockchain really, helps us to implement quite easily, actually.
I've got a question as far as that goes. It's actually really a twofold question. So first part of the question is, the big difference with blockchain and cryptocurrency is the decentralized aspect, as you just said, Mike. And I'm actually curious to hear from the three of you on your opinion of the advantages and disadvantages of it being decentralized. So for example, if you did reside in a country where you did have master patient records and image sharing across the country, what would be the advantage of, using that existing infrastructure, using, the typical IHE and whatnot profiles and standards versus, say, using blockchain? So that's the first part of my question. And then the second part is, I think, and I want your opinion on this, blockchain's biggest strength is that the fact it's essentially public information, although it's encrypted. But I'm actually curious that in your time playing with blockchain, what's the recourse if the key to that data was compromised? Can that data then be re-encoded, or is your data then compromised?
Sure. So to the second question, we actually discovered that issue as well. So, we had floated around different ideas of, well, maybe we, only store de-identified or anonymized information on the blockchain, or maybe we have to encrypt all of the data that we're storing in a smart contract so that if the keys are compromised, the data still remains safe and, complies with all laws and regulations. But that is certainly a real issue that, needs to be addressed. And like I mentioned, a couple of ways of addressing that, but I think we, need to be careful as to how we store the information and what we're actually storing. So are we storing information IDs or pointers to, third-party systems? Are we storing encrypted data? What exactly are we storing in the smart contracts on the blockchain? So that's a very good point.
I agree. And, we came across so many real world challenges, and not just technical challenges, but real world problems and hurdles that would need to be crossed while we were kind of investigating this technology. And I mean, yeah, that was one of them where it's like, blockchain is really slow to like query it and to traverse through the history and transactions. So it's like we need to really be careful about how much information is being stored out there, not even from a PHI standpoint. I mean, that's important too. But from a technical standpoint, I mean, you wouldn't want to store image data out there because it would just blow up, right? We ran into a lot of those things. I'm sorry, Mohanad, what was your first question?
If you lived somewhere where there was infrastructure for centralized healthcare data management, is there a reason for you to go over to blockchain cryptocurrency versus sticking with that government-provided infrastructure?
The thing is that it is global, and therefore when you're, like, say you're Canadian and you travel, you're someplace that can't get that history. And there's other countries that don't let the medical information out. Like Abu Dhabi doesn't allow medical information out to other countries. It's a big thing. Like, so we talked about just storing images de-identified, but you have to give a medical company your ID to access them and identify them as yours. We had discussed, well, it would be a great way to store access to images for research because they would be de-identified already.
So, it's great to have access to this information and have the historical record, but I kind of wonder about the permanence, right? Like, at some point, you want to be able to forget, like some amount of information should be forgotten over time, right? Like, I think there was somebody at a Senate hearing, and they just pulled up his Facebook page from when he was in college. He's like, yes, some of my youthful indiscretions, he was like climbing on a statue or something, and I'm hard pressed right now to think of like a direct medical example, but, like maybe, marriages, divorces, whatever, right? So with the way the blockchain works and whatnot, there is no forgetfulness in the memory, right? So how do you guys see any potential issues or problems because of that?
So one aspect where I think blockchain could be really useful for, having historical, transactional data would be like in research. So for example, if all of the data is de-identified and it's really important to track patients over time, and that data needs to be retained for research purposes and legal purposes, then blockchain is a perfect solution for that. In terms of the right to be forgotten, blockchain definitely has challenges with that, and trying to figure out, how do you essentially delete pieces of information or, remove them in a way that they can't be later retrieved. That's a challenge that we certainly realized and, need to figure out, the best solution for that. Or, maybe blockchain isn't the best technology for that type of data where, we need to provide a way for, the right to be forgotten to be implemented. Lindsay or Kathy?
Yeah, I could see patients wanting that information forgotten, but currently in the medical field, nothing is deleted that I've seen. Like, they bring up your whole history, especially if you provide it. And that may be the key if a patient doesn't want to provide their information to the blockchain. But like we all know, once it's out there, it's never deleted. It's still surfacing here and there. So if they want to be forgotten, I think that would be a big challenge. If they don't sign up to begin with, that can be done.
So just to clarify for myself as well, so stepping back, in terms of a transaction, is a transaction finite then? Can you put an expiration date on a transaction to where after a certain time it's deleted and retained only by the initial holder of the data, right? Or is it once a transaction is made, it's available to both parties indefinitely?
I'm not sure if blockchain can handle that. I don't know if it has expiration dates, but I was thinking that too, put an expiration on it and see if then we can take it out of the chain. From what we've researched, that's not necessarily the case with blockchain, but it could be a good addition.
Maybe for next year's SIIM Hackathon. Do we have a team here?
No, we have a lot more employees now. We might have a couple teams.
Nothing's ever impossible, right? It's all about the resources.
Time and money is the only factors.
Yes.
We always used to refer to it as pizza and Mountain Dew as your limiting factors.
That's where you said no pizza.
You just got me excited about pizza, and now you're taking it away. So I have to ask, I've been really patient, but Shark Tank, oh my gosh, where was this? What happened? And are we going to start seeing Buy Me on vendor floors? And is Mark Cuban sponsoring this now? What's going on?
So this was really exciting. We had this exciting opportunity after the hackathon. I mean, we got over this adrenaline high after winning first place in the hackathon. And after about a month or two after the hackathon, we got an email from SIIM saying that they would like to nominate us for the Academy for Radiology and Biomedical Imaging Research Shark Tank that they have annually. And this was such a unique experience that I probably won't ever, have the opportunity to do again. And it really was a lot of fun. It really was all about pitching your idea to a bunch of investors, which is something that we have no experience doing. So we only had 3 minutes to pitch it. And the focus of the competition is presenting to, like I said, a group of potential investors and get buy-in as a commercial product. Then the top 3 finalists would go on to RSNA to do a longer presentation and hopefully win. So it really forced us to investigate what other related products were out there as quote unquote competition, and really made us think through like the business side of things and how we would like pitch this and what our business plan was. And we didn't have one, of course, because we were focused on the technology. So it really forced us to focus on the business side of things.
It was one of the biggest challenges I think I've faced in my career. I've been in IT forever, but never had to think that much about the business side. We had to apply for a patent. We had to apply for a patent to be considered in the Shark Tank or agree to letting our idea out to the public. So at the Cleveland Clinic, because we worked for them, we had to go through their chain to see if we were applicable for a patent application. They came back and said, no, it's just an idea. And at this point, you're not robust enough for a patent. And if you can tailor it down from what you did in the hackathon, which is what we tried to do, we tried to specialize it more than what it was at the hackathon to actually go after medical imaging. And therefore, it might have been patentable, but they still determined it wasn't far enough along to be patentable. So we went into the Shark Tank saying that, we didn't have a patent, but we're willing to share our information. And that was one hurdle. The other hurdle was looking up and seeing if there are any other software applications that do this. Found a couple companies that had something on the books, but they weren't ready yet. They weren't commercial ready yet. And then having to explain everything in 3 minutes was tough.
Our team is really used to focusing on the technical details and aspects of a project or a solution. But the Shark Tank experience was sort of, different in that we had to focus on the features, the business model, and the sort of like profitability, right? So how are we going to fund the project and how are we going to gain interest in customers? So it was really, for our team at least, a really different way of thinking and framing a problem versus, creating a prototype in the hackathon and focusing on the technology instead of the business model and the value of the product. It was a really great experience, and I think our team, got a lot of value out of it.
So, kind of diving a little bit deeper into that, did you guys get help from the tech transfer office to make these evaluations? Were there certain models that you used, or did you look at other aspect of industry to, kind of say, well, we're kind of analogous to this? This is a huge quagmire, obviously, and I just want to get a feel for what your experience was and, what resources that you utilized to help navigate.
So one of our challenges was, blockchain technology in medical imaging, or even just healthcare in general, is pretty new. Blockchain itself is a fairly new technology, and it's definitely more mature in other industries, as we've seen. So one of our struggles was just trying to figure out how to apply what's going on in other industries to healthcare, right? And to medical imaging, and sort of frame the problem in that sense. and then apply a business model on top of that. So, we faced several challenges. And as we mentioned before, we were trying to, do some market research and see if there were any products or even, companies out there who were interested in blockchain and in the medical field. And we actually came across a few companies that are marketing blockchain as a service. So, in a similar way to how you might buy a piece of software commercially and it's hosted or in the cloud, or it's software as a service. So the concept of blockchain as a service, came up a lot. So it was definitely a challenge to frame this, problem and pose this to the Shark Tank, but it was definitely worthwhile and very fun at the same time.
The Cleveland Clinic office that helped us with the patent also did research to find out if something similar was already there. So they did help in that matter. Trying to figure out return on investment was kind of up to us. There was also questions on a pricing model, things we don't normally discuss or have to do because we work for a company and everything is theirs. It was very interesting, and that was like one of our biggest challenges.
This has been a great conversation. So really want to thank every one of you for your time today. Before we close it off, I'd like to ask any of you if you've got any closing thoughts, anything in general, anything related to the hackathon, anything related to blockchain, cryptocurrency. Maybe we go in alphabetical order. So Kathy, Lindsay, and Mike.
I really enjoyed doing this. I like working with SIIM, the hackathon, and then having to do the Shark Tank was like icing on the cake because we always want to expand ourselves and grow and learn. And this was a great opportunity, and thanks for recording us.
I'll just mention that, every year at the hackathon is just amazing. Even, now that we're virtual for the hackathon, the sense of community and just the fun that we have to dive into a new technology and meet other people is just amazing. SIIM is a very non-threatening community, and we're very supportive and helpful. So if there's anybody out there who's thinking about, or even just thinking that maybe they want to join us in the hackathon, you're always welcome, even if it's just, with an idea, or, if you're clinical or technical, it doesn't matter your background, you're always welcome, and all ideas are welcome.
I'll just echo what Kathy and Lindsay said. SIIM is a really friendly environment and community, and we look forward to the hackathon every year. We get super excited about, new technologies and just being able to experiment with different tools. And the hackathon is a really, great place to do that. And it's also a good opportunity to help others who may not be as technical, or, maybe they have a great idea, but they're not quite sure how to implement the idea or build a prototype. And there's just a lot of really great collaboration, and it's a really great community. So thank you for the opportunity.
Of course, thank you to all three of you for your time today, for your work as part of the SIIM Hackathon over the years. I've always said this to people in the SIIM community, and I will say it one more time on the record here today. Your team has been one of the most exciting teams over the course of the SIIM Hackathon, because you guys always come with crazy, fresh ideas, and that's a compliment. And also, you roll up your sleeves and you work pretty hard and you're very determined to do something cool. So that energy is always appreciated, and it's quite contagious. So thank you all for your time today. I appreciate you being here with us and hope to have you in another episode soon.
SIIMcast has been brought to you by the Society of Imaging Informatics and Medicine. Please visit our website at SIIM.org for more information and educational content, including webinars and an archive of prior episodes. Please follow us on Twitter at SIIM_tweets. Thank you to our listeners for your continued support.